My name is Victoria, and this is the story of how a string of innocent moments turned into a scandal that nearly destroyed my marriage. It all began on a crisp autumn morning when James, my husband of 10 years, surprised me with something he thought would brighten my life. His green eyes sparkled with excitement as he said, "I've got something for you." In our expansive backyard, there stood the most majestic horse I'd ever seen. His sleek coat shimmered in the sunlight, and his dark mane flowed with a kind of wild elegance. Having a horse was always my ambition as a girl, but reality had other ideas. James, who has been working for months to fulfill my childhood fantasy, will be called Midnight. At first, it was all so innocent. Midnight was just a beautiful horse, a companion during the long days James spent at work. But as time went on, the relationship became more complex. James noticed that I spent more time with that horse, training him, and just being in his presence. He joked one evening, his tone light, but his eyes held a hint of something deeper, and I laughed it off. "Oh, come on, James. He's just a horse. You know how much I've always wanted one." But James wasn't wrong. I had grown accustomed to Midnight because he was more than just freedom. He was a diversion from the small fissures that were developing in our marriage. James and I weren't fighting, but there was an unmistakable gap between us. Our once lively dinner conversations had reduced to courteous discussions about the weather or work. Midnight filled that gap by offering a connection. One evening, James arrived home earlier than usual, and I was in the stable brushing Midnight's mane and humming softly to myself when he entered. His expression was unreadable, and I didn't even hear him pull into the driveway. He spoke in a calm but strange voice, and I froze, realizing how lost I had been in my own little world. I apologized, trying to sound casual. "I don't mind that you love this horse, but I feel like you'll choose him over me," James stated in a more serious tone as he approached Victoria, his boots crunching on the hay-strewn floor. His words hurt, because I secretly knew he wasn't wholly incorrect. But how could I tell James that nighttime wasn't simply a horse anymore? Rather, he had evolved into a haven where I could escape the difficulties of my marriage without coming out as ridiculous. "Victoria," James said, "I love you, but it feels like I'm losing you to something I can't even compete with," in a softer tone. I didn't know how to react, so I remained mute. That moment signaled the start of something I didn't anticipate. James became suspicious and began to pay more attention, ask questions, and even watch me when I was with Midnight. At first, I thought his worries would go away, but they persisted, and his suspicion turned into a shadow that followed me everywhere. At first, it was small remarks that lingered longer than necessary, and questions about how much time I spent with Midnight, as well as whether I really needed to be out in the stables so frequently. One night, as we lay in bed, he asked, "Do you even notice how much time you're out there?" His voice was soft, but his words hung heavy in the air. I turned to him, trying to find the right response. "Jimmy." He glanced at me and said, "It's not like that Midnight is just a hobby, a dream I never got to have as a kid. It's not something to worry about." I know that Midnight isn't to anyone, but sometimes it seems like you've replaced me with him. His green eyes were full of mistrust. I wasn't prepared for how hard his remarks affected me. Even though I didn't want James to think that, I couldn't deny that Midnight had turned into I was unaware at the time of how much my sanctuary was beginning to erode the core of our marriage. But a week later, the stress reached a breaking point. James returned home early once more. This time, I spoke to him as though he could actually understand me as I was in the stable at midnight without warning. It wasn't until his voice pierced the silence that I heard James come closer. He startled me by calling out to Victoria. With my heart racing, I turned quickly. "James, you scared me." He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and an unreadable expression. "What are you doing?" I tried to laugh it off by ignoring him. "What does it look like?" James stepped closer, his boots crunching on the hay-covered floor. "It seems like you'd rather hang out with that horse than your husband." I put down the brush and turned to face him completely because his words hurt. Jimmy, it's absurd of you. He's only a horse, isn't Midnight? James asked in a stronger tone now, since it seems like he's more than that to you. I glanced at him, trying to find the appropriate words to express what you were trying to say. James let out a deep breath while stroking his hair. I said, I feel like I'm competing with something I can't understand. You're out here all the time talking to him, brushing him, and God knows what else. Meanwhile, I was wondering when my wife would return home when his words sliced through me like a knife. I hadn't realized how my actions had made him feel that night over dinner, and the silence between us was deafening until James finally broke it. His voice was forceful but quiet when he spoke to Victoria. I don't want to argue, but I need to know where I stand. Are you content? Do you still want this marriage? I froze, taken aback by how intense his question was. James said, Of course I want this marriage. I love you. Then why does it feel like you've checked out? With a little break in his voice. Why does it seem like you have substituted something else for me? It's not close to midnight. It's about us, he said. He wasn't wrong, so hit me hard. My escape from James's increasing distance from me had become midnight, but it was now doing more harm than good. The breaking point came a few days later when James left for work, or so I thought. I was in the stable once more, hurrying Midnight's man and talking to him about my frustrations. Frustrations I hadn't shared with James because I simply don't understand him. I whispered to Midnight, Why can't you see that I need this, that I need you to keep me sane? James was standing in the doorway when I heard footsteps behind me. His face was a mix of hurt and rage. So this is what you do when I'm not around, he said in a shaky voice. Contrary to what you believe, I stumbled, my heart pounding, wondering what I should think. He shot back at Victoria. You pour your heart out to a horse instead of your husband when I walk in here. How do you think I'll react? I was speechless. James was displaying intense emotions, and I was unsure of how to mend the rift between us. We got into the largest argument of our marriage that night. James claimed that I had emotionally checked out by putting Midnight before him. I defended myself by saying that he was exaggerating, but I knew deep down that he wasn't. I hadn't crossed any physical boundaries, but perhaps I had emotionally, as Midnight had become my confidant and my safe haven, and in doing so I had neglected the person who ought to have been my partner in everything, James. That night was a turning moment because it caused our tension to reach a fever pitch, making me question whether we would ever be able to get back together. James was correct as I sat awake in bed and stared at the ceiling. His words kept coming back to me. Midnight was not about the horse, rather it was about freedom, simplicity, and a life free from having to confront the harsh realities of my marriage. I had been utilizing Midnight as a means of escape. James was in the kitchen drinking coffee when I decided to face the situation head-on the following morning. The tension between us was as thick as the morning fog, so I remarked in a steady but hesitant voice, "We need to talk." James looked up at me with a guarded expression, but I was listening, so I took a big breath. I've been spending too much time with Midnight, and it's unfair to you and us, but it's not about him. Rather, it's about me feeling like I've lost a piece of myself somewhere along the way. As he put down his mug, James's eyes softened a little. I don't mind if you have hobbies or things that bring you joy. I just don't want to feel like I'm being replaced, and you're not. I told him that Midnight had been a distraction, but that wasn't the issue. Instead, it was that I hadn't been honest with you about how I've been feeling. We spent the next hour talking in depth for the first time in what seemed like years. And I confessed that I hadn't been feeling fulfilled, not because of James, but rather because I hadn't taken the time to care for myself or our relationship. James listened, and his initial anger was replaced with understanding. I get it, he said. But Victoria, we're meant to work as a team, so if something's wrong, you should tell me, not keep it to yourself. I know I said that with tears in my eyes, but I just didn't know how to say it without coming across as accusatory. He reached across the table and took my hand, and we worked to mend what had been damaged over the course of the following few weeks. I deliberately tried to balance my time with James, and James tried to understand why midnight had become so important to me. We even began spending time in the stable together, transforming what had previously been a source of conflict into something that strengthened our relationship. James, who had never been much of an animal person, started to bond with Midnight in his own way. One evening, as we watched the sunset from the back porch, James turned to me and said, "You know, I was never really jealous of Midnight. I was jealous of how easily you seemed to connect with him while we were struggling to connect with each other." His candor surprised me, but it also gave me a new perspective. I think I was scared, admittedly scared of losing the connection we had, so I found solace in something that couldn't let down. "We're not perfect, Victoria, but I'd rather fight with you than lose you." James grinned with a tinge of melancholy in his eyes. It was then that I understood how fortunate I was to have a husband who was prepared to defend our marriage even when times were difficult. The trip wasn't simple, but it was worthwhile. Midnight was still a part of our lives, but he no longer stood for escape. Rather, he became a reminder of resiliency, and that with love, honesty, and hard work, even the messiest things can be cleaned up. Looking back, I am thankful for the wake-up call. It wasn't about the horse. Rather, it was about how the horse exposed the issues that needed to be fixed in our relationship. James and I are stronger now as a result, and although Midnight is now just a horse once more, he will always be a part of the tale that kept our marriage intact.